wardrobe cases and changed their clothes behind me, still sweating from the 3-hour show we had just played. After 20 years of being a band, this was the first time Pat, Nate, Taylor, Chris, and Rami had ever seen me, their fearless leader, completely break down in front of them. But I couldn't hold it all in any longer. I had to let go. In a moment of catharsis, it was as if every emotion that I had suppressed in the last 40 years came to the surface and finally breached the levee inside me, spilling onto the concrete floor below. It wasn't that I was unable to walk and yet continued on an exhausting tour of 65 shows, where I had to be lifted onto a chair each night to perform, only to be carted away afterward like a broken theater prop. It wasn't that I still felt the searing pain from the sharp titanium screws drilled deep into my bones that will forever remain as a humbling reminder of my vulnerability and fragility. And it wasn't that I was filled with the devastating longing for my family that breaks my heart when we're apart for weeks on end, preying on my fear of absence and the separation anxiety left behind by my father. No, this was something else. It was the fact that I had just finished playing a sold-out show at Chicago's Wrigley Field to 40,000 people directly across the street from the Cubby Bear, that tiny club where I saw my first concert at the age of 13 and was inspired to devote my life to rock and roll. I'd played stadiums twice this size before, conducting a sea of fans in chorus after chorus, all of us joining together in rapturous harmony for hours. But it wasn't the sheer capacity of the room that brought me to tears on this night. It was the fact that Wrigley Field was just a crosswalk away from that dimly lit corner bar once filled with bodies writhing and dancing to the deafening shriek of feedback and crashing drums that served as my dawn. That summer night in 1982, when my cousin took me to see Naked Raygun, was my baptism. I was bathed in the distorted glory of the music. From that day forward, I was changed, empowered by the revelation that I felt as my skinny little chest was crushed against the tiny stage, and I came face to face with the raw power of rock and roll. I had finally found my niche, my tribe, my calling. But most important, I had found myself. This was my great awakening, and dreams were no longer dreams. They became my divining rod. I was an idealistic misfit, empowered by the audacity of faith and a reckless determination to do it my way. Punk rock became my professor in a school with no rules, only teaching the lesson that you need no lessons, and that every person has a voice to be heard, no matter the sound. I've built a life on this notion, and blindly followed it with undying conviction. It was that night that I had stepped out onto that crosswalk, and there was no turning back. As the band quietly filed out of the dressing room, I was left alone in my chair to reflect and slowly put the jagged pieces of this lifelong puzzle back together. I thought of the long drives that my mother and I would take in our old 1976 Ford Maverick sedan, singing along to AM radio, where I first heard the sound of two voices in harmony forming a chord. This was the spark that ignited my fascination with music. I thought of the glorious instrumental fury of Edgar Winter's Frankenstein, my first record, purchased at the drugstore and played on the record player that my mother brought home from school until its old needle wore out. I thought of the Silvertone guitar with the amp built into the case that I played every day after school, strumming along to my Beatles songbook, learning the beauty of composition and arrangement. And I thought of the old pillows that I substituted for drums on my bedroom floor, thrashing away to my favorite punk rock records until my hands were bloody. Each tear, another memory. Each memory, another step in the crosswalk. Maybe my seance had worked after all. It had been 30 years since I begged the universe for this blessing as I knelt before the flickering candlelight of the altar that I'd constructed in my carport. Maybe this was all just a matter of manifesting desire, believing that anything is possible if you devote yourself to it entirely. Maybe it was the audacity of faith in oneself. Maybe I had sold my soul. These things could all be true, but I knew that if it weren't for the epiphany that I had that night at the Cubby Bear, I never would have dared to try. I surely never would have taken the chance and made that phone call to audition for my favorite local band, Scream, setting off a chain of events that would change my life forever. Had I never seen that flyer on the bulletin board at my local music shop, I undoubtedly would have followed an entirely different path. But I saw a door open before me, and rather than stay within the comfort of my tiny bedroom, I decided to dive through it, leaving a life of stability and security behind. Though still bound to my youth, I was ready to be free. I was ready to bet everything on this burning passion that raged inside of me, and I made a commitment to honor it. When I was 17 years old, music had become my counselor when I needed guidance, my friend when I felt alone, my father when I needed love, my preacher when I needed hope, and my partner when I needed to belong.